First way, make passion the foundation of your presentation. Make passion the foundation of your presentation. You know, I was standing at Brownsbridge Church a few years ago now with one of their staff members, a good friend of mine called Tim. Brownsbridge Church is one of North Point's 8 Atlanta area churches. And as we stood there just before the service, I said to Tim, you know what, Tim, I know exactly what's going to happen over the next hour. And he said, why? Have you seen a program? I said, no, I haven't seen a program, but I know what's going to happen. He said, well, go on then, tell me what's going to happen. I said, well, what'll happen is your pastor Adam will stand up and Adam will talk about the weather because the weather had just changed. Then he'll talk a bit about sports and then we'll sing 2 and a bit songs. Then there'll be a little video bump and then we'll have a speaker for half an hour and we'll all be dismissed. And Tim kind of smiled and we sat down. And for the next hour, that's exactly what happened. Nothing surprising, nothing out of the ordinary, totally predictable. Now, don't get me wrong. Predictability is good. It's good for those of us who want to invite our friends to church. We want to know that it's going to be good. But predictability is more about rehearsed quality. It's not about the same format, the same service week in and week out. I think we failed in bringing passion in our presentations. You know, one of the biggest passion fails that I've discovered is we use these exciting things called countdown clocks at the start of the service. And yet when the countdown clock gets to 0, it's a complete anticlimax. I mean, in the big wide world, every time there's a countdown clock, it leads to something dynamic, fiery, exciting. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there's a fireball and the rocket takes up and heads to the moon. Or you go to a concert and you're sitting there and the lights begin to change and the countdown comes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and the band come on stage and the sparks fly and the audience go mad. And yet what happens in church? It gets to 0 and somebody wanders up and says, hi everybody. I need to tell you my name and a few notices before we get going. And it's a complete and utter anticlimax. It's a passion fail in my idea. And it's not just in the service planning, it's in the teaching as well. I think for years and years, our equation to bring transformation and change to people's lives has just been application will equal transformation. If we just apply the teachings of Jesus, people will be transformed. I think there's a part of that equation missing. Because if you go to church and you hear the preacher say, you need to love your neighbor. And Jesus says, love your neighbor. We have to go home and find creative ways of loving our neighbour. And we expect that will lead to transformation. And so people get in cars and they go, I hate my neighbours. They're such a pain. They play loud music late into the night. Their garden's a wreck. And they've got barking dogs. I mean, I hate my neighbours. How am I supposed to love them? But preacher says I must. So I grit my teeth and I'll bake some cookies and I'll do my best. We think that kind of application will lead to transformation. There's a part of the equation that's missing. We need to start with inspiration. Because honestly, I think inspiration plus application is what leads to transformation. We've missed the passion. We've missed the inspiration. We need to inspire people to love their neighbours, tell stories, paint pictures, talk about what could be if we got this right. I remember sitting in North Point at a Be Rich campaign launch. I think it was the first time North Point did Be Rich, and Andy was preaching and he asked everybody in the audience to give $39.95. And he said, if we all gave that, we would raise enough money to make a huge impact in our community. And he started to talk about what could be if we all did this together. And I've never seen this in any church ever before. I've certainly never seen it in North Point. And about halfway through Andy's talk, some guy simply heckled him. Some guy shouted out, just tell us who to write the check to. He felt so inspired by Andy's words. He just wanted to change his behaviour. He wanted to act. He wanted to make a difference. We need to bring inspiration back. You know, when I was on staff of a church, I would spend hours and hours fashioning phrases and mission statements and planning tactics about how we should make Sundays work and make Sundays better. And I was talking to my wife, Debbie, about it. And Debbie's a nurse. She's a specialist baby care nurse. She works in intensive care with intensive care babies. And she has a pretty stressful job. And I was talking to her about what we're trying to achieve at church. And she said, you know what, Duncan, it's all well and good. But for me, a busy nurse, you know what? I just want to turn up on a Sunday and feel a little bit better about myself before I go home. That's it. I just want to know God loves me and things are okay. And I just want to kind of check in with God again. I'm not interested in all your mission statements and clever ideas. And that sparked something in me. So when we gathered as a creative team to put our services together, from that point on, I started to talk about transforming people when they came in to what we wanted to see them when we went out. So we would put a flip chart up quite frequently and we'd write down all the emotions people would come to church with. Like maybe hostility, maybe fear, maybe joy, maybe anxiety, maybe confusion. We'd write all these words down on one side. And then on the other side of the flip chart, we'd write down the emotions we wanted them to leave with. We wanted them to leave with happiness. We wanted them to leave with hopefulness. We wanted them to leave with a sense of adventure and courage about life. And then I would say to the team, listen, there's this gap in between. It's about 60 minutes, maybe 70. That's what we've got to move people from here to here. So what are we going to do? And are we sure that all the elements we've got in this service will move those people from this list to this list? We've got to bring passion and inspiration back to our services. One of the best ways I think of doing that is what psychologists call emotive storytelling. And they would say to you that the best way to connect passion with your audience is by showing them something they can relate to. And sharing stories, honest, true stories, are part of our nature as social beings. It's what we do. So I would just encourage you, don't be afraid to tell a story that reveals the emotions that are driving your presentation. The other thing I heard somebody say recently, which again was one of those mind-blowing things, someone who was working in church, and they said to me, Duncan, 10 years ago when we planned services, it was all about cultural relevance and people wanted it delivered with excellence. We wanted to be culturally relevant, which is why our worship leaders had tattoos and Mohican haircuts. It's why we sang hip songs. It's why we had moving heads on stage and smoke machines and colourful lights. We wanted to be just like something they would see on TV or something they would see at the theatre. We wanted to be culturally relevant and we wanted to do it excellently. And he said to me, over the past 10 years, that's changed. He said, what I'm discovering now is that people are not interested in that quite so much. What they want is emotional relevance. And they want that delivered with authenticity. Emotional relevance delivered with authenticity. Which got me thinking, how can you and I be more emotionally relevant in our services? I think one of the ways is to take people on a journey in our service rather than switching them from one thing to another all the time. That just becomes clunky and it doesn't become emotional. Right from the minute they walk in to the minute they walk out, let's take them on a journey. Here's why I say that. There's often just too many messages in church. There's the messages on the signs as you walk in. There's the messages you get from the notices at the start, the hundreds of messages about God that you get through the worship songs. Then there might be a video element or somebody might tell their story. And then there's a bunch of messages that come from the sermon. And then maybe, just maybe, as people leave, there are 5 or 6 other messages. Don't forget the Alpha course. Don't forget to sign up for this. And if you're new here, go and see that person. And we're bombarded with loads and loads of messages. Again, psychologists will tell us that the human brain has 2 memory buckets, if you like. There's a tiny bucket, which is your short-term memory, and there's a bigger bucket with your long-term memory. And the job of the short-term memory is when new thoughts come in, they want to dump it into the long-term memory as quick as they possibly can. And it's a bit like you and I walking into a hotel and we want 2 rooms for the night, and we say to the receptionist, how many rooms have you got in your hotel? And they say, well, we've got 200 rooms. And we say, we only want 2, one for me and one for my friend. And the receptionist says, no, I'm sorry, all 200 rooms are full. And it wouldn't matter how long we stood there and pleaded with the receptionist, please, just one more person. What if we had one room and we shared a bed even? Couldn't you squeeze us in? No, I'm sorry, sir, there is no more room. But, we're VIPs, we're very important. What we're coming to do is really important. It doesn't matter, there's no more room. What if the most important point you want to make on a Sunday comes when there's no more room in someone's short-term memory because it's been packed out with so many clunky ideas and messages? We need to stick to one big idea and build everything around that. Use stories, use action points, use humour, but build everything around the one big idea, even through the songs. One of the most potent ways you can do that is to ditch the announcements. Did he say ditch the announcement? Honestly, it was the hardest thing I ever did in church, was to kick the announcements into touch. And we created a thing that we called the Forge feed. I worked for a church called the Forge Community Church. And all the notices that were to do with in-house, to do with our core people, we put them in this weekly email that went out to people, and we took notices away from Sunday mornings. It was so freeing. You know, the African-American preacher who I adore, T.D. Jakes, he says you should be able to preach the announcements. If you can't preach the announcements, you shouldn't be doing them. So we made our announcements strategic announcements about important strategic things that we thought would be of benefit to people. So they're just some ideas. I think another powerful thing I've seen recently in terms of trying to help create more of a sense of emotion on Sundays and more of a sense of passion. One of the ways I found that the authenticity comes is when you turn monologue, which is mainly what church is about, into dialogue. And that's really hard. You can't just say, any questions, anybody? It's kind of not the done thing in a big group. But what about considering some kind of Q&A? I was talking to one church leader, and they've started doing Q&A at the end of their series. So at the end of 4 or 5 week series, the pastor says, hey, I'm going to stick around for an hour. I'm going to be over there. If anybody wants to come and ask questions about the series, about the things that we've said, and there's no bad questions. You can ask anything you like. And they say a whole bunch of people come and do that. And it creates a sense of authenticity, because authenticity comes through dialogue, not just monologue. The other thing I've seen churches do is add response to their services. And not just response. You know, when you say to a church leader, hey, we need to be more emotional in our service, we need to add some response time, their mind immediately goes to music. Let's sing a few more worship songs. Now, don't get me wrong. Music is a powerful way of creating emotion. Of course it is. But this church has realized that people respond in different ways. So at the end of their services, they've developed this thing that they call stations of response. All around the room, there are a variety of different stations. You can go over there and paint something, over there and build something, over there and draw something, over there and write something. You can go over there and pray with someone. You can go over there and have a conversation with someone. You can go over there and have communion with someone. Just a whole bunch of different places to give people the chance to respond in a way that works for them. Or you can just stay in your seat and sing with other people that are there. You know, another way to bring that sense of emotion and that sense of passion back into your services is to use humor, but to use it well. Use humor to connect people to your main point. You know, when I was a young preacher, an older guy, a guy who I thought was brilliant, a guy called Doug Barnett, I said to Doug, what's the secret, the real secret of why you're such a good communicator? And he said, Duncan, all through my life, I've always thought if I'm going to give them a point for their head, I need to give them a picture for their heart. If I'm going to give them a point for their head, I need to connect it with a picture for their heart. And one of the best ways of creating a picture is to do it through humor. Now, I read one Harvard Business Review study recently, and they came to the conclusion that humor was shown to reduce hostility and relieve tension in an audience during a presentation. There's no doubt, is it? People will come into your church with various levels of hostility, maybe towards their spouse or their kids or the person that's brought them, maybe even towards God himself. And they'll come with a sense of tension and anxiety. Humor is a powerful way to relieve that, but it needs to be connected to our main point. You know, I heard a preacher tell this joke in a sermon a little while ago, and you might have heard it before, but it made me chuckle. He said, I say, how many Christians does it take to change a light bulb? And we all had to respond with, I don't know, how many Christians does it take to change a light bulb? And he said 4. 1 to change the bulb and 3 to reminisce about how good the old bulb was. And it kind of made me laugh because it was true. Do you know what his sermon was about? No, me neither. But I remembered his joke because that's the power of humour. That's how powerful humour can be. But unless you align it to the big idea, it's not worth using it. So I've rambled on probably far too much, but my first point for you to bring a sense of delight back into your services is to make passion the foundation of your presentation.